Storybooks are there to teach your kids to be good. Jonathan Livingston Seagull or Little Riding Hood. But comic books are cooler. Zombie horror, traveling blue boxes, Spike and Buffy Angel if we absolutely must. Ew. The name's Samantha Maybe. I'm a Loki-loving Whedon lady.
Don't you call me Sammy or I'll punch you in the face.
Really?
Comic fans.
Remember, remember, the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. But what of the man? Not the man in the mask from the movie, or the man from 1605 who attempted to blow up Parliament. Let me tell you about the man who makes me remember the 5th of November. A man whose work I'll never forget. That man goes by the name Alan Moore, and he is well known for creating and contributing to some of the most beloved comic book series of all time. He is largely responsible for the popularization of the Swamp Thing, a truly terrifying tale of a human soul that refuses to pass on even after death. He has also worked on Batman, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and of course, V for Vendetta. Settling in to watch V every 5th of November is now a popular tradition for a great number of movie and comic book fans, as V for Vendetta began as a comic strip. The enigmatic marvel that is Alan Moore became a subject of my interest, thanks to another of his creations. Watchmen. I first read the comic after hearing about the movie release, and I became really excited about the prospect of seeing more of Alan Moore's work on the silver screen. I then spent the majority of the year thinking about the comic and anxiously awaiting the premiere date. For those who may not be familiar with the story, Watchmen focuses on the tale of a group of individuals who don superhero costumes to defend their city, in this case New York. In this universe, gangs had begun to dress in costumes, and so the police decided to do the same. In the 1940s, the first group, who called themselves the Minutemen, eventually succumbed to harsh realities. Homophobia, clinical insanity, and homicide plague the Minutemen, and the group disbands. But there's a new group forming, in the younger generation, ready to take on the evils of the world. The government has begun to place strict limits on superheroes, however, and they are no longer permitted to patrol in their costumes. So how did these people adjust to life out of costume? What about those who can't take their costumes off? When barred from their calling and subject to government control, what will they do when suddenly the former superheroes become the target of a murderer? The entire series is rife with philosophical commentary on what it means to be a superhero, the nature of the human race and society itself. The list really goes on and on. It's difficult to find anything at all to criticize about Watchmen. You really have to read it for yourself. Trust me, there is something for everyone. Something that I personally feel much more comfortable critiquing is the Before Watchmen series that has been running for the past few months. Now, I've only read the first 2 issues of Dr. Manhattan and Rorschach, but I'll tell you a little bit about both of them. Again, these are the only 2 storylines I've been exposed to in the Before Watchmen series, so there may be potential tie-ins that I'm not aware of, but bear with me and we'll talk about these, and remember the 5th of November. First, let's talk about Rorschach. His story revolves around a series of murders committed by a serial killer named the Bard. He leaves mutilated corpses in his wake, so of course this is the kind of thing that attracts a mind like Rorschach. The story begins with our hero trying to possibly bust up a drug ring. He ends up in a big fistfight with a man who goes by Rawhead. Ew. Then gets some drugs and heads to a diner. End of issue 1. Issue number 2 contains a bit of exposition about this Rawhead guy, and Rorschach takes out some of the thugs that beat him up in the sewer. Rorschach does in fact seem to be on the trail of the Bard, and because we saw him climb out of the sewer after the Bard's last victim was found, it may be safe to assume that Rorschach isn't committing those murders. God forbid that our protagonist be an anti-hero! After stopping by his favorite diner, again, and taking a short rest in the hospital for some more free pills, he's on Rawhead's trail, pounding on another one of the goons who bested him in the sewer. In the end, not too much has happened so far, but it's been good Rorschach-like fun. Lots of blood spraying everywhere, people getting murdered, gruesome imagery, and good old detective work. I assume that some kind of big twist is coming, since there are only 2 issues left, and in order for the story to reach its current logical conclusion, he would have to quickly find Rawhead and eliminate him, then find the Bard, who presumably has been out of reach for some time. I doubt that it's going to be that straightforward, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. Now on to my personal favorite character, the blue guy.
Dr. Manhattan Before Watchmen issue number 1 opens with a seemingly simple question. What's inside the box? The entirety of the 2 issues is concerned with the idea of quantum uncertainty, that when you hold a box, you can never be certain of what is inside until you open that box and act as the necessary observer. At first, we see a bit of John pre-smurfication when he was still with Janie, and even before, when he was just a boy learning to tinker with clock parts. Issue 1 is very much controlled by John's narration. Without it, the story would make little to no temporal sense. He then gives us a little dose of multiverse theory, and we get glimpses of what his path could have looked like if he had not been paired off with Silk Spectre when the Crime Busters first got together. A later page seems to imply that him being with Laurie was the only sensible endpoint, but that's just my opinion. In the end of the issue, John attempts to re-experience his past life back before the accident, as he has apparently never tried to do this before.
Except that as soon as John was created, he and all other possible Johns and all possible timelines existed, including the John that would later try to look back into his human past. So the fact that he says specifically that he's never tried to do it before is kind of pointless. Ow.
After John tries to do this, something very strange happens. Instead of seeing himself walk into the intrinsic field chamber at 1:15 and never walk out the same way again, he goes in, retrieves his jacket, and leaves. John as we know him is still present in mind, not in body, and he continues to follow himself, still perfectly human. He marries Janie, and sees a small boy with a comic book depicting blue men on Mars. We continue to get more views of potential realities created by human John's choices in this version of reality, which is already an alternate form of the reality we know to be the actual version in the rest of Watchmen.
Ow!
We get yet another explanation of what it means for something to have an undefined nature whilst inside a closed box. John's father explains that keeping a box locked tight for too long can cause more and more potential scenarios, even alternate universes that will eventually collapse into just one reality. So I guess that's the point of this whole adventure, right there. John not only has the ability to see into alternate futures of his own life, but he can also observe alternate past selves. Issue number 2 ends with a huge explosion, artfully crafted to resemble the hydrogen atom John inscribed on his forehead, and that one famous Oppenheimer quote.
Despite being able to see some of my favorite characters again, I've been fairly underwhelmed by the Before Watchmen stuff.
If you love the characters and the story of Watchmen already, they're worth the read. If not, these 2 characters can maybe be boiled down to some gritty language and gratuitous violence for Rorschach, and a lesson in quantum uncertainty for Dr. Manhattan.
I don't feel that these comics are meant to expound on the background of these characters. I feel that we just came to know them so well by the end of Watchmen that there really wasn't much exposition necessary, so why even write them? Maybe they don't add much to how you see the character in the series, but, and I really hate to say this, maybe it could just be called well-written fan fiction. And I don't mean that negatively at all. I don't. I just think that so far within the scope of the Watchmen universe, they haven't been that earth-shattering, well, except in a literal sense. But again, since I haven't read all of the Before Watchmen comics, maybe I'm missing out on something. And if that's the case, then just really let me know, okay? So Alan Moore's wonderful story continues on in Before Watchmen. While I'm thrilled that the series is still getting attention, I honestly don't even think it's necessary. If you haven't read Watchmen yet, go out, find yourself a trade copy, sit down for a weekend, and just read. You will not be disappointed. There is literally something in here for everybody. Literally. I'm Samantha Maybe. I hope I've given you a fun way to remember the 5th of November. I'm gonna go watch V for Vendetta. Hi. Okay, so because I told multiple people that I would show this. Here is me opening my new Cybermat. Yay. Boring part's over. He's so cute. He's so cute and tiny. Look at it. He's so cute.